this great country safe and to protect the rights of every citizen in this country. It's a promise that we're going to uphold the law without fear or favor.
Hi again, everybody. It's now 5 o'clock in the East. Newly sworn in Attorney General Todd Blanche addressed employees of the Department of Justice earlier today. And if you take what he said right there at the podium, what we just played for you in a vacuum, it sounded pretty good, right? We're going to uphold the rule of law in our country. He's going to make sure that justice in our country will be applied equally to everyone. But unfortunately for all of us, we do not live in that vacuum. And the daylight between what Todd Blanche said today and what has happened since he has been running the Department of Justice so far is extraordinary. Let's break down a few things he said, starting with, we're going to uphold the rule of law without fear or favor. Well, that's not the experience of former director of the FBI, Jim Comey, who's been indicted by Trump's Justice Department twice. Here's what he said when I spoke to him about being a constant target of Donald Trump's and how his family feels about it.
Look, it's bad to be indicted. It's bad when someone you love is indicted, but they've kind of gotten used to the fact that because I've been a critic of Donald Trump, I'm a target. I'm sure John Brennan's family feels that way, Jim Clapper's family, and lots of others. There's a cost to speaking up in this strange era, awful era we're in now. And I think they accept that. I think they're proud that I act the way I do. I'm not going to be quiet.
Todd Blanche today also proclaimed to hold a reverence for judges in the justice system.
We will always respect the role of the judiciary. We will not engage in or stand for any sort of performative attacks that undermine the institutions that we are sworn to uphold.
It's one of the most gobsmackingly untrue things he said today. It is not the experience for the actual federal judges who now face high-level government officials calling them names, and then the subsequent violent threats against them for having ruled against Donald Trump's policies, rulings that they have made while just doing their job. Here's U.S. District Court Judge Jack McConnell speaking with me about that last week.
There is an unprecedented amount of personal attacks against judges, not just me, but all across the country. It's systematic, it's growing, it's severe. There's sustained efforts. In my opinion, they're a result of sustained efforts by high-level members in the executive branch. This constant personal attacks on my fellow district judges and myself and their families is the beginning of the attack on equal justice under the law according to the rule of law.
When addressing DOJ employees earlier today, Todd Blanche also said this.
Making sure that every case we bring or we defend is decided based on the facts and the law and not for some other purpose.
Checks notes based on the facts and the law? Really? Seriously? Cameras were rolling. They didn't even pretend that facts were important when they charged David Hearn. Remember him, the former Olympian, with vandalizing Trump's much ballyhooed reflecting pool? The case against him was eventually dismissed, even though Donald Trump wants that guy, Todd Blanche, to bring it back. Here's how David Hearn described hearing U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro read out the charges against him.
That was a little bit of a shock, but it was the things she was saying were so outrageous. I had to try to put together, okay, what did I do that's getting her to say I did these things? Because I didn't know how that connection.
Because there were no facts. And there's more. There was where Todd Blanche began his remarks today, by acknowledging those who work at the Department of Justice and saying that there are no better civil servants anywhere in the world, something we actually agree with. But the reality is that the current DOJ is a completely hollowed out and traumatized version of what it once was. Thousands of DOJ employees, career public servants, have left the Department of Justice on Todd Blanche's watch because of him and because of the Trump administration. Todd Blanche personally directed and oversaw the firing or forcing out of hundreds of career DOJ public servants, and then bragged about it to Matt Schlapp at CPAC. He said, we, quote, canned them, people who worked on cases that investigated the president's conduct or prosecuted the violent January 6th insurrectionists. Todd Blanche's empty words are where we begin today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Justice and intelligence reporter Ken Dilanian joins us. He was in the room for that as Todd Blanche addressed DOJ employees this morning. Also joining us, the founder of the Public Integrity Project and the former special counsel inside the Department of Justice, Brendan Ballew's back, and NYU law professor and legal analyst Melissa Murray's here. Ken, you first. How were his comments received?
Well, in the room, Nicolle, they were received warmly because the room was filled with loyalists and newly hired political appointees who clapped and stood for Todd Blanche. But I was sitting in the back rows with reporters, and we were just slack-jawed. Well, first of all, it's worth saying this. Todd Blanche is a pretty good public speaker. He was a former prosecutor, after all. And he has this really kind of endearing demeanor. He was humble. He was earnest. He was funny. He was saying all the right things. And if you would just, as you said up top, if you just walked in there and from Mars and didn't know anything about what's been going on at the Department of Justice, you would think that this was an unremarkable address that could have been given by any attorney general in American history, except for the fact that, as you just laid out, almost everything he said is contradicted by his actions. And, look, I'm not a psychologist. I don't want to do armchair psychology, but I have talked to people who know Todd Blanche who say that, there's a part of him that wants to run a normal Justice Department, and that maybe he thought he could, or at least do what Bill Barr did in the first Trump term and sort of hold Trump off and kind of be normal and run it the way it's always been run. But then he quickly realized that was not going to happen when he was Deputy Attorney General, and he set about, agreeing to and orchestrating a series of compromises that have remade the Justice Department and have shattered decades of norms. But he still wants people to think that, he's running a normal Justice Department. He wants to be remembered. This is the version of Todd Blanche that he wants the history books to reflect. Unfortunately, we're not living in that world, and, there's just too much evidence to the contrary, Nicolle.
Brendan Ballew, your thoughts?
Well, the line that I was thinking about when you were going through those clips was about respect for the judiciary. And I actually just came back from a court hearing where, suing the Department of Justice for failing to comply with the Epstein Files Transparency Act. And it was just a pretty astounding 2-hour experience of watching this judge, Judge Sullivan, who's enormously well respected, bend over backwards to try to get the Department of Justice to answer basic questions about why they weren't following his court orders. And the Department of Justice, the lawyers just did not have answers. There were long periods of silence where they weren't able to answer anything. And it just makes me think about how, in that case, the Department of Justice has now blown through court order after court order. And I think it's emblematic of what the Department of Justice has become, which is, not just disrespectful of judges, but at least in substance, contemptuous, and, really seeing them as an impediment to accomplishing their objectives rather than partners in trying to do justice. And so, I was just talking with some prosecutor friends afterwards. It's just heartbreaking to watch what the agency's become over the past 2 years.
I mean, Brennan, the judges in their own telling believe that Todd Blanche is part of Judge Jack McConnell there is talking about high-level officials from the executive branch saying things that threaten their lives and their families' lives. It's not just the disdain for the rule of law and their rulings. It's an enthusiasm for personally endangering their safety.
Yeah, I think the threats are an inevitable consequence of how this administration has been talking about judges. When you have members of the administration or members of Congress talking about impeaching judges just for issuing sort of ordinary rulings that go against what the government wants, when you have people talking about these judges as enemies of the people or enemies of democracy and so forth, I mean, that is classic illiberal leader, rhetoric. You see it in El Salvador, you see it in Turkey, you see it in Russia and so forth. I think Ken made a really good point, which is I think Todd Blanche is a former federal prosecutor. He used to be in SDNY. He was, somebody that actually was part of what you might call the legal establishment or the legal mainstream. I'm sure at some level he would like to be a mainstream attorney general, but he has shown over and over again a willingness to not just buy into the worst instincts of the president and those immediately around him, but to enthusiastically bring those instincts to force in prosecutions.
He's also destroyed the department, Melissa. Quote, under Blanche's leadership, which is since he became Deputy Attorney General in March of 25, more than 16,000 DOJ employees have left the department, including a quarter of its attorneys. He's overseen the termination of hundreds of employees, including agents, attorneys, and professional staff who worked on January 6 cases at the special counsel Jack Smith investigations.
So, it's really stunning, Nicolle. Todd Blanche gave a speech today that one would expect of someone who was coming in as a kind of blank slate. But we all know that Todd Blanche has ridden shotgun to Pam Bondi for the last 2 years. And, the things that he is railing against, the things that he says he's going to fix are the things that he broke. And he's been part of the apparatus that has led to the disunity in the Department of Justice, that's led to people leaving, that's led to low morale. I mean, now him taking to the podium and saying that he's going to restore the morale in this beleaguered department is a little bit like a burglar promising to put back all the stuff he burgled. Again, I think there's a lot here. I love Ken's armchair psychology of Todd Blanche. And you're right. He is not only a very good public speaker, he's someone with a really interesting background. He's someone who went to Brooklyn Law School during the evening program, humble roots, and he's risen to the very top of the legal profession. I have no doubt he would like to be a mainstream guy, but he rode the wave that is Donald Trump, and there's no mainstream in that. And I think he's likely to have to reckon with that going forward, and this is all window dressing for what's to come.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the psychological analysis because it seems so central to this. But it's very obvious from the outside of the relationship between Trump and Todd Blanche that Trump doesn't respect Todd Blanche. All Trump had to do was drop the weaponization fund, right? That's all he had to do. And instead he went through this humiliating, the whole Trump story is about Republicans totally controlled by Donald Trump and sycophantic loyalty to him. The one thing they buck him on, the one thing they don't let him do is appoint Todd Blanche. Here he is already reversing himself on the anti-weaponization fund, which was the ostensible stumbling block for Tillis and Cornyn. Let me show you that.
The president feels very strongly, as do I, that there were people who were victims of a Department of Justice that was absolutely weaponized, and he feels very strongly that he would want to make them whole, as do I. But it will not be through the anti-weaponization fund, which, again, was never set up, and nothing has happened with it.
So here's where I don't believe that he wants to be normal. A normal attorney general doesn't believe that there's a single person that was, quote, a victim of the Department of Justice, because all the Department of Justice did was investigate crimes and then leave it to a jury of the insurrectionist peers to render judgment. A Department of Justice actually cannot be weaponized against the Proud Boy. I mean, if he wanted to be real, he wouldn't have said that. And he said that after he got the job, Ken. How do you see him trying to split the baby?
So I think that he understands that there are certain things he has to do to maintain his viability in the system, to use an old phrase, but that he's also marketing himself and to those senators in particular that voted for him, those swing senators, as the least bad option, as someone who is going to stop bad things behind the scenes. And he has done that, in fact. He drummed Ed Martin out of Maine Justice, to cite one example. And he is, whether spoken or unspoken, that message gets out to the Republican establishment. Whatever you think bad things that Todd Blanche did, it could be a lot worse. There are a lot worse people out there, and at least he's a former prosecutor who, and look, 85% of the Justice Department is running as it always has. There's no MAGA way to put drug dealers in prison necessarily, and so and he tried to speak to that today, and just telling people to ignore the noise, ignore the high-profile stories, and just do your jobs. Of course, the high-profile stories, though, are where American values and the traditional norms of the Justice Department are being compromised. The investigations of Donald Trump's political enemies, the weaponization fund, ad infinitum. And so you can't ignore those things, but that's the deal that he's made. From the time he left his law firm and threw his lot in as Donald Trump's defense attorney, he placed his bet on Donald Trump, and that bet has now paid off in a huge way for him because he is one of the few people to serve as Attorney General of the United States. But he's also going to have his reputation forever will be tarnished, many people would argue, by the compromises that he's had to make to get this job.
Yeah, and I think we probably don't know the scope of the David Hearns out there, the people for whom people like Jeanine Pirro cart around large cardboard white boxes, proving that there's no evidence to charge them or convict them. We know about that because he, too, has a public profile and a very prominent attorney. So we probably don't know about that 85% figure, right? We don't know what we don't see. Kendall Lanning, thank you, though, for joining us with your coverage of this. Brendan and Melissa, stick around. When we come back, we'll ask Brendan about the lawsuit he's bringing against Donald Trump in his latest corrupt scheme to profit off the presidency. Also ahead for us, the Trump administration's revenge campaign continues. This time, it's against former Air Force Secretary Frank Kendall, and all for speaking the truth about something that's clear to everyone, that Donald Trump's Qatari-gifted Air Force One does not have the same security capabilities as the original Air Force One. Secretary Kendall will be our guest later in the hour. We'll also look at growing concerns from family members of sailors on board the USS Abraham Lincoln. It's a story we first covered here, and now there's disturbing new information about what some sailors are doing on board that ship after nearly 9 months at sea. Deadline White House continues after a quick break. Don't go anywhere.
It's literally insider trading.
It's Kashi. You
Maybe
could bet
I'm
on
wrong.
everything you could fix.
Yeah.
Wait a
You
minute,
fix your
is
own
that
bets.
real? You get access to a tweet before he makes it, and then you could bet on that tweet? How is that legal?
We'll see.
Wait a minute, what is this? Trump sued over Truth Social advance access sale.
I'm online in the Oval Office.
Who's
Just so
telling
fast.
him this is a good idea? I feel like I need
Nobody's
to be closer
telling him
to
shit.
It's like an experiment to, I don't know, watch them open their eyes and see the guy they cheered to the presidency for who he really is. And it's not a terrible question, right? Who's telling Trump it's a good idea? That was, of course, Joe Rogan and Shane Gillis, uber famous podcaster and comedian, respectively, this afternoon, just shooting the you-know-what, talking about the latest corruption, latest service being offered by Donald Trump's social media company that now allows customers, people who pay for it, to gain access to Trump's market-moving missives on Truth Social for a mere $100,000 a month. And they're correct, of course, to question its legality. The service is already being sued by 2 media companies who, in their lawsuits, call it corrupt and unconstitutional. We're back with Brendan and Melissa. Brendan's group, the Public Integrity Project, is one of the groups that filed that suit against Truth Social. Brendan, what are your thoughts about how and whether you'll be successful legally, and what do you do for all of the gains that are being made in the interim while this is available?
Yeah, so let's talk about the problem here, why we think we're going to win, and then talk about sort of what to do about this. So, just to set the baseline, Truth Social is the preferred method for Donald Trump to make any official announcement. That's where he hires people. That's where he fires people. That's where he announces wars. That's where he announces ceasefires. If you want to know what the government is doing, you have to use Truth Social. And the scheme here is to provide, and I'm quoting Truth Social itself, market-moving statements from the president, vice president, FBI director, and other top leaders in the government, early access to those who are willing to subscribe for, as you said, $100,000 a month. And Truth Social has already said that they have a number of people signed up and that they're actually looking to expand the service to potentially encompass gambling or betting. So literally facilitating, people taking bets on what the president's going to say in his official announcement. So that just seems profoundly corrupt, absurdly corrupt. And it is also unconstitutional. It's unconstitutional under the First Amendment. The government can't discriminate in who it gives information to. So once it decides to make information public, it can't say, I'm going to withhold this information because you refuse to, for instance, contribute to the president's private company. It's unconstitutional under the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause, that says that you have to treat people similarly, and you can't have you have to have a rational basis for when you treat people differently. There's no rational basis here, between distinguishing who gets information, whether they give a ton of money to the president or not. Now, what to do about, the folks that are already going to be making money here? That's something for another lawsuit, potentially an insider trading lawsuit. It's also the work of potentially a future Department of Justice. This is the kind of scheme where people are making money off of inside information that hopefully Department of Justice that respects the rule of law is going to prioritize.
Melissa, I don't know what the legal standard is, but I want to say this carefully. If Shane Gillis and Joe Rogan describe it as insider trading and knowingly illegal conduct, is it the same as, non-falsity was the standard that Fox ultimately has to cough up $1 billion to Dominion for in a libel context? If there are people who know, as Shane Gillis and Joe Rogan there clearly do, that this is flagrantly illegal at the time, are they legally exposed?
Hard to say, Nicolle. I mean, again, it depends on the specificity of the laws and sort of like the insider trading laws and how it would apply here. And, obviously, there is a real problem with the president using this as a means of publicizing, as he puts it, market-moving information and making it available on some kind of advance basis to those who have paid for the service in advance. So, I mean, at the very least, it is incredibly, incredibly unethical and raises a number of problems, some of which may be statutory violations. What I think is so interesting about Brendan's lawsuit is that the point that they're making goes beyond this question of insider trading. It is about the basic framework of a democracy where the media is available as an accountability institution. If the president has bypassed the traditional media by releasing all of this information on Truth Social, his own privately controlled portal, and the media has to get early access in order to be able to cover the government in the same way as these people who have this early access, that's an unconstitutional condition. There is a requirement in the Constitution for freedom of the press to be able to cover government institutions. If you require advance access to be able to do that, that's an unconstitutional condition. It also impedes the First Amendment right of the press to be able to cover the government as a hedge against government encroachment, as a means of calling the government to account. So there is a lot here, but to me, the most important thing is not the insider trading or the potential for insider trading. It's that this lawsuit is about the way in which this practice goes to the very heart of what it means to be a functioning democracy.
It's amazing. And you could see, to pull back to our other conversation, this might be something Todd Blanche is having to defend against you. Brendan Ballou, Melissa Murray, thank you both so much for joining me today on these stories. When we come back, the former Secretary of the Air Force, who's been stripped of his security clearance by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth for saying something about Donald Trump's Qatari Air Force One that is now obvious and plain for anyone and everyone to see. Former Secretary Frank Kendall will be our guest. Don't go anywhere.
Well, it has a lot, and it has a lot of capability. But as I understand it, in about a month or so, they're going to send it to have it be maxed out. So they're going to be sending it, and they'll have it be maxed out. It'll take about a month.
It has a lot of capability. I press the button, the seats lay flat. Even Donald Trump there had to publicly concede that his Qatari gifted palace in the sky, as he calls it, was lacking in the vital security features and still needed to be, quote, maxed out before he could use it safely. That was last month after a bombshell report in the New York Times about concerns over the president's safety on that aircraft, which lawmakers have been demanding the White House disclose. We also learned that during the NATO summit in July, Trump even swapped out the gifted jet for his old Air Force One because it lacked those necessary military defenses before fleeing that second plane in a catering container under threat from Iran to a third aircraft. But this is the Trump administration where retribution for perceived criticism takes precedence over even non-deniable truth and reality. First, Trump's Justice Department went after the New York Times reporters on that reporting with subpoenas, which the DOJ eventually withdrew. Then on Friday, the Pentagon revoked the security clearances of former Air Force Secretary Frank Kendall, claiming he had disclosed sensitive information in that Times story. Secretary Kendall says he plans to sue the administration because his on-the-record quotes reveal nothing that wasn't already inherently obvious about the lack of time needed to make Air Force One level security modifications to a jet being used as Air Force One. I want to bring in former Air Force Secretary Frank Kendall. He's now a senior fellow with the Center for American Progress, and his new book, Lethal Autonomy, The Future of Warfare, Whether We Like It or Not, is out now. Also joining our coverage, military analyst, retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertling. He served as the commanding general of the U.S. Army in Europe. Secretary Kendall, first, your reaction to being stripped of your security clearances after this, in my opinion, rather innocuous quote in the New York Times story.
Nicolle, thanks. But compared to a lot of the other things that injustices, I guess, by this administration, it's a pretty minor thing. But it is without any merit, and I have the opportunity to do something about it. My mother taught me a long time ago you should push back at bullies, and this is kind of bullying behavior we're seeing from this administration all over the place. So I'm going to push back. I've never said anything classified. There were some leakers who apparently did say something that are classified to the New York Times. I'm not one of those people. My guess here is that they went looking for those people, couldn't find them. They had my name, and it was convenient. I've criticized the administration, very vocally and very publicly ever since I left office. So it was a way to get a scalp, I guess, for the White House, and make a point to people who want to speak out against the administration. So anyway, we're going to go to court over this, and I'm pretty confident we're going to win.
I was going to ask you something that you started to address there, which is, do you think they stripped you of your security clearances because you've been a critic of Trump administration policies? Do you have any suggestion or indication from anyone involved in this that was the case?
Nobody's ever spoken to me at all about this. The only thing I've heard is the tweet that came out that announced that the revocation of my clearance. I did get an email the next day from an organization I was a consultant to do some classified work, telling me that they've been told that my clearance had been revoked, and that's it. That's all I've heard. So I'm speculating. The two obvious speculations again are that they needed somebody. There's a lot of pressure, I think, coming from the White House to get the leakers. They couldn't do that, so they came for me. And also, of course, it sends a message to everybody who speaks out against this administration. I'm in pretty good company here. Senator Kelly, for example, they've gone after him. There are a number of other people. My attorney, Mark Zaid, has also had his security clearance revoked. And I spoke to some people today, in fact, who, because of their DEI activities, a retired general had his clearance revoked. So this is a pretty common tool, apparently, this administration's using. There are over 100 people this has happened to, all as far as I can tell, without any merit.
And now that you see the story develop to what the Washington Post and the New York Times reported at the beginning of the week, that the story that you're quoted in isn't the full story at all, that Donald Trump actually left Turkey on a third aircraft after hiding inside a catering truck with Walt Nauta, who's his personal valet, and a woman described by Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan as basically printing out positive feedback about Donald Trump on social media. What is your sense about what they were so agitated by in that story you're quoted in?
I don't know. I think somebody apparently said something about having less defensive measures on the new airplane, the gift that he got from Qatar. And then, of course, the story that you just related came out about shifting airplanes and in the catering vehicle and so on. Look, I don't know what's on the Qatari airplane or not on it. It came in after I left the Air Force. I don't know what happened that triggered this, if it's true, series of events. Apparently it is. The most bizarre thing about this to me is that the president left a great many people on Air Force One subject to whatever risk he was trying to avoid without telling any of them or doing anything about it. And that's disturbing.
Yeah, General Hertling, your thoughts with all of the new information we have as of this afternoon?
Yeah, well, first I'll comment on the secretary's instance because, truthfully, I read the article in the New York Times. There was no classified leakage. And in fact, if they go after him, I would say they ought to go after Netflix, because you can watch a documentary on Air Force One on Netflix and kind of get more of the same in terms of what it has versus what a normal 747 has. So it's just ludicrous that these kind of things are occurring. And my thought, truthfully, is people like the secretary, who provide consulting advice to defense contractors, are very critical because they give an inside look on what's happening in the military, and it helps others, private corporations, to contribute to the U.S. military in various ways. Truthfully, Nicolle, I asked for my clearance to be removed once I retired because I didn't want to be approached by defense contractors. I wanted to do something else when I left the military. But, I would see the secretary as a patriot more than anything else when he's talking about the comments that relate to what Air Force One has and how it has to protect the president in all ways, and not only protect him, but also have an airborne command post, which requires an awful lot of equipment. And I don't believe the Qatari jet, again, I don't know what the Qatari jet has, but I don't think you can turn a 747 into an aerial command post in just a few weeks like they had it.
All right, no one's going anywhere. When we come back, we will ask our esteemed guests about troubling new developments about a story we first brought to you last week, the growing concern on the part of family members for their loved ones still on board the USS Abraham Lincoln. We'll bring you that reporting next. There's a deeply upsetting update to a story our own Priya Sridhar brought us here last week about the extended deployment, the exhaustion, and lack of basic needs that U.S. service members are facing on board the USS Abraham Lincoln, now nearly 9 months at sea and 6 months into Donald Trump's deeply unpopular war with Iran. MS Now spoke with the wife of a sailor who says her husband jumped overboard last week and was in the water for about an hour before he was rescued. She shared texts from her husband sent days before he jumped that read in part, quote, "I think the boat is finally getting to me, and I really don't think I can keep up my peace act anymore. I'm really trying to not feel negative or hopeless. But between the Wi-Fi and not knowing when I will come home and not knowing what is happening back at home, it's really getting to me." A Navy spokesperson tells MS Now this, quote, "We have not observed an increase in suicidal ideations aboard the ship. We take every service member's well-being seriously and have medical and mental health professionals available to assess and address concerns as they arise." Just breaking this afternoon, though, the Wall Street Journal is now reporting that the Trump administration is preparing to send a fresh aircraft carrier to replace the USS Lincoln as part of a, quote, previously scheduled rotation plan. That's according to U.S. officials familiar with the matter. We're back with Secretary Kendall and General Hertling. General Hertling, this is reporting, and I imagine it is extremely, extremely painful for family members to speak out about these things. My sense is that usually the military takes care of its own before it becomes something this dire and this public. But I want to read you more of what our colleague reported. Quote, "Food obviously has been scarce. All he's told me, this is from a family member, is that there's a time when he was only eating half a cup of rice and 2 tortillas. The morale is bad, not being able to shower. They don't have toiletries. They're having to share stuff. They're exhausted. Trump doesn't want the bad publicity, and he knows that. You can't tell me he does not know what's going on over there." Your thoughts about how it came to this?
Yeah, a couple of things, Nicolle. The first thing is that having spent my life with men and women who are in the service of their country, they'll do any mission that they're asked to do as long as they maintain trust and care from those that lead them, and that they know what the mission is and that they know how they're contributing to it. As you probably remember, back in 2003, I was with the 1st Armored Division in Baghdad, and we were getting ready to come home, and the Secretary of Defense told us we were staying for 3 more months, so it turned into a 15-month tour. Had another 15-month tour in 2007 and 8. That's dog years. When you're in the Army, you're doing things, you're missing birthdays, you're missing anniversaries, but you're doing the mission. having spent a little bit of time on an aircraft carrier, I'll tell you, God bless the Navy guys, because I don't see how sailors do what they do. It's 24/7, 365. Whenever they're on the ship, they don't get a break. There's shift work. It's you can't sleep very well. I was on this aircraft carrier, couldn't sleep because of continual landing. I hit my knees every night, thanking God I was in the Army and not the Navy for the couple of days I was on that aircraft carrier. So that's what we're looking at right now. And when they don't have connections with their families, when we were extended in Iraq in 2003 and 4, General Dempsey, the division commander, sent me back to Europe for 3 days to explain to the families what was going on. And I had an experience, as he kiddingly said, hey, you're gonna go into another combat tour because you're gonna talk to the family members. And it was exactly that. There was anger, there was disappointment. They didn't care what the mission was. They just wanted their soldiers home. And I can tell you 100 stories about what I heard over a bunch of different locations in Germany when I went back. This is tough. And the message from the Navy about not a larger set of suicide ideations, well, how many is normal on an aircraft carrier? I don't know, but I had 4 suicides in my division in combat in 2007 and 8, and each one was devastating. So you have to care for your people and make sure that they have that connection home through Wi-Fi or letters or whatever, and that their quality of life is halfway decent, even though they've been asked to do hard things.
And Secretary Kendall, let me just say again that the families, I think this is what General Hartling is getting at, are already doing something that is unimaginable, right? They're going months and months and months without their mom or their dad, or with their parents, without their son or their daughter. And let me read you more from the wife of the husband that some of this reporting is about, from MS Now's reporting. Quote, the wife said that her husband went to his chain of command and the medical team on the ship and expressed concerns about his mental health, and apparently told them he was not okay. He was not doing okay. The wife said her husband said they kept brushing him off. She also said her husband expressed concern that his prescription contact lenses had expired and that he was having trouble seeing and doing his work properly. He works on helicopters on the carrier's flight deck and told her he believes it had led to accidents there. I mean, this is the safety of this individual that he's tried to sound the alarm about, but it sounds like what he's worried about is that without his prescription contact lenses, he's endangering the lives of others. How is this happening?
Look, I think Mark described the situation really well. We both have an Army background, but I've spent some time on carriers as well. A couple of major points here, Nicolle. These families aren't lying to us, okay? They're telling us what they're hearing from their sailors on the ship. So when Secretary Hegseth comes out and says everything's fine, he doesn't know if everything's fine or not. We don't either. We only know these isolated things that we're hearing. So the first thing that Secretary should do is go get some people he trusts onto that carrier to find out what's really going on and get ground truth, and then you can act on that. These are all very credible. The families and the people deployed have to carry a pretty big emotional burden when they do this. And part of the way you handle that is you steel yourself for a certain period of time, for the length of the absence that you're going to have to endure. And you kind of start counting down through that, and it's an expectation that you can manage to a certain degree. But what's been happening is these extensions keep coming, and that expectation has to be reset. That's a very emotional burden, both on the people on the ships as well as on their families. And eventually that gets pretty old. The shortages, I don't know. They could be there. I do know that the operational tempo has been very high, and that wears people down. You know, Mark described it pretty well. Shift work, and you often have other things you have to do when you're off shift. I've experienced that. So it's a very stressful environment, and it can lead to more suicidal tendencies, and can also lead to operational failure and tragic accidents.
We should say, too, that government officials contacted by MS Now couldn't comment because of privacy regulations around medical records. Secretary Frank Kendall, Lieutenant General Mark Hartling, we thank both of you for joining us for this conversation. And we just want to say this and mention that if you or anyone you know is in crisis, you or they can call or text 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline or chat live at 988lifeline.org. Quick break for us. We'll be right back. My guest on this week's episode of the Best People podcast has been fighting to protect our democracy and our elections for years now. Mark Elias is a familiar face to viewers of this program, but in this conversation, we got to go deep, and I pressed him on